This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for joining us. Today's episode is about intellectual dishonesty. On past episodes, I've explained the Gish Gallop. It's a term coined by the former director of the National Center for Science Education, Eugenie Scott, after she debated this guy, Duane Gish. Duane Gish, there he is, a creationist who insisted the world was 6,000 years old, like Mike Johnson did. And after debating Duane Gish, Eugenie Scott came up with the Gish Gallop, the Gish Gallop. So what is the Gish Gallop? It's Gish debating in bad faith. He strayed from the subject by providing a fire hose of unrelated, irrelevant, and pointless half-truths, flooding the zone so it was impossible for his opponent to decide which one of those statements, falsehoods, and outright lies are worthy of rebuttal. And that is the state of political discourse here in America. We are a nation of Duane Gishes galloping into obscurity. That is Duane Gish. Now, let me just go big here for a second. Is that his real toupee? Can that be his real toupee, or is that a fake toupee? I can't tell if that's a real toupee or a fake toupee, but that's Duane Gish from the Gish Gallop. Every Sunday morning, news programs, every interview with every prominent politician is literally pointless. They stray off the point to parrot a stream of talking points that have nothing to do with what they're being asked or are debating. Trump on Meet the Press doesn't do the Gish Gallop so much as the Gish Stampede. And it plays well on television, as well as social media. As an intellectual exercise, I want you to try this. Engage your right-wing idiot, friend, neighbor, not through conversation, but through a series of text messages, forcing that neighbor or friend or crazy uncle to stick to the subject. They can't. Now, someone I've known for 30 years, living in Texas these days, has become a Trump supporter. And he's always texting me, baiting me, and I bait him, and I need him because he's really bright and he forces me to concentrate my mind, even though he's incapable of doing the same for his pathetic, mushy, limp mind. Lawyer, by the way, lives in that's what living in Texas will do to you. So this week, he texted me insisting the Democratic senators questioning Pete Hegseth on Tuesday. Those Democrats and I were all rooting against the American military. We're all hoping we fail in Iran because we hate our soldiers and this country. Now, believe it or not, this guy is really smart. He's a lawyer, and a good lawyer. Really well read. Better read than I could ever dream of being. Talking to him over the phone, he can do the Gish Gallop. But texting back and forth, that don't work. And I humiliate him. I really do. And he gets angrier and angrier and just keeps galloping and galloping, unable to stay on point, even though he's an accomplished lawyer. He accuses me of hating the country, hating the soldiers, rooting for America to lose in Iran. When I text him, okay, you're claiming it's unpatriotic to question Pete Hegseth and the war. You claim it endangers the lives of our soldiers to be against this war. Okay. Do you think the war in Iran is a success? Just answer that question, yes or no. Do you think we should escalate the war in Iran? Perhaps send in ground troops? Yes or no? That's all I want to know. Or maybe we should ask ourselves, can we really succeed? We should ask ourselves whether this war was actually necessary. And in fact, has it been and will be more dangerous for our troops? I put that into writing, and he can't answer. Cannot answer, so he gish gallops, brings up Biden's failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I write back to him. I say, you're a really good lawyer. What I'd like you to do, since you do read what you've just written. Do you think you're answering my questions? Do you think you're staying on point? Read what you stated. You had a statement, I responded, and then you responded to my response in writing. And can you honestly say in good faith, you are backing up your initial statement, or are you changing the subject? See, texting, not talking, texting privately, not in front of other people, not on social media. When you text, you force these people to leave behind a very incriminating paper trail that belies how insane they sound when they commit the gish gallop to words. That is why tweets always come back to haunt us. It's why lawyers like my friend in Texas doesn't like emails when he's being a professional, doesn't want to commit anything in writing to his clients. He'd rather tell them. It's why Donald Trump, Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton never used email as president. Joe Biden never used email. Now, Trump uses social media, but he calls it rhetorical hyperbole when he's busted for saying something stupid, illegal, racist, bigoted. Anyway, so that's the gish gallop, which is a subset of intellectual dishonesty. Now, intellectual dishonesty can include the gish gallop, but it's something far more nefarious, and it's used by people who should know better. Intellectual dishonesty is often deployed by lawyers, the managerial class, pundits, lobbyists, news talk show hosts, and well-educated charlatans who are arguing in bad faith, who refuse to tell you the real reason they're saying what they are saying because they don't want you to know what they really believe. So that is the definition of intellectual dishonesty. For example, the Republican Party has been taken over by fascists. Their policies, their speeches, their words and tactics check off every box on the list that qualifies a person to be called a fascist. But fascism in America is a dirty word. Nobody can get elected or be accepted in polite society if you openly admit that you don't believe in self-rule, that you don't believe in a democratic republic, and that you don't believe people should be allowed to vote because they're too stupid and cannot be trusted, especially Black people, Hispanics, and women. That is what the Republican Party believes. Sometimes they say it out loud, most of the time in private. But more and more, it's below the surface. It's what Republicans are saying when nobody's really listening. But they have spiritual leaders right now who insist women should not be allowed to vote. I think it's the 18th Amendment. I'm not sure. I think it's the 18th Amendment. Pastor Doug. This is Pastor Doug. He is Pete Hegseth's spiritual leader. Pastor Doug, who held a Protestant mass on Easter Good Friday at the Pentagon. They canceled the Catholic mass. Pastor Doug believes the Catholic Church should be outlawed, has said that. Pastor Doug says women should not be allowed to vote, and he is the spiritual leader of Pete Hegseth, for Pete Hegseth and his family. They believe slavery was a good thing, that the Confederacy was a good Christian nation. Pastor Doug says that. And Pete Hegseth follows Pastor Doug. Doesn't follow Jesus, follows Pastor Doug. So Pete Hegseth is no different from the Republican Party. He drinks too much, so he says the quiet part out loud. He doesn't believe blacks, women, and Hispanics should be promoted within the military. And he doesn't believe they should vote. They don't believe poor people should vote. They don't believe anyone should vote. Pastor Doug has said that. Pastor Doug has said, democracy doesn't really work. We need a theocracy. Peter Thiel, who finances the career of our vice president, has said capitalism and democracy cannot coexist. I choose capitalism. So this is the unholy alliance between the religious right and the billionaires, the money people. They don't believe in democracy. When you get to the top of the MAGA pyramid, the people keeping Donald Trump in office, they believe in pretty much what is going on in Iran for the past nearly 50 years. They want a grand Ayatollah, a theocratic Christian leader as opposed to a Muslim. They want an Ayatollah subject to the checks and balances of the billionaires who own and control our country. That's what they believe. Only Pete Hegseth is irresponsible enough, as well as his pastor, to say that publicly. But it's what they believe. The rest of the Republicans, MAGA Republicans, they don't want us to vote, but they'll say something as innocuous as, oh, I don't know. They'll say, why is it so difficult to get Democrats to agree that only U.S. citizens should be allowed to vote? Right? You hear that all the time, and it sounds so anodyne. Why is it so difficult for Democrats to just agree that only U.S. citizens should be allowed to vote? Right there is intellectual dishonesty. Why? Well, first off, Democrats already agree that only citizens should be allowed to vote. And nobody who's a Democrat and in a position of responsibility, except in some cities, believes non-citizens should be allowed to vote. It's not an issue, and it's against the law for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. It's against the law, and that law works because non-citizens are not voting. Even in New Jersey, The only reason some of them voted is the state of New Jersey effed up and registered them. So they figured, oh, I can vote. It's not a problem. I've never heard one Democrat getting themselves elected to office, citywide, statewide, or national office, insisting non-citizens should be allowed to vote in federal elections. Not one. Again, some cities do allow non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. That is true. But nobody in Washington, D.C. is saying non-citizens should be given the vote in federal elections because it's against the law. It's against the law. So that's one part of the intellectual dishonesty. It's dishonest because you're starting out by saying something that sounds reasonable, but it's half true. Yes, non-citizens shouldn't be allowed to vote in federal elections, but no Democrat is pushing for non-citizens to vote because it's already against the law, so it's not subject to debate. And yet, because of intellectual dishonesty, Republicans, and yes, I'm using Republicans and intellectuals in the same sentence, Republicans are framing some fictitious debate to disguise what they really want, okay? The other reason it's intellectually dishonest is Republicans are amplifying a problem that doesn't exist. Non-citizens never vote. Never, ever vote. Yes, New Jersey, but that was the fault of the state government leading a couple of hundred non-citizens to believe they could vote. The Heritage Foundation, we've been over this, but it bears repeating. The Heritage Foundation, which gave us Project 2025 and really wants to put an end to democracy, they went out of their way to study the billions and billions of ballots cast in the past 25 years here in the United States. And even the Heritage Foundation concluded the chances of a non-citizen voting in a federal election, those chances are 0.00000.1%. It is intellectually dishonest because you're forcing us to debate you about something that has nothing to do with why you really want to pass the SAVE Act. You don't care about non-citizens voting, and you know they're not. You care about Black people voting, Latinos voting, people of color voting, poor people, and women voting because you don't want Black people, Latinos, people of color, poor people, and women to vote. Now, you don't want anyone to vote, but before you can get to that, you want to make it impossible for Black people, Latinos, people of color, poor people, and women to vote. So you want to make it impossible by first outlawing mail-in ballots. That's what the SAVE Act wants. Outlaw mail-in ballots. Why? Well, it means people who don't have access to transportation, the poor, people who are sick, people who can't afford a car, people who can't take time off from work, that would be the working poor, or they can't leave the house to go vote because they're caring for their children or an elderly person, or they're shut-ins. You do not want them to vote. So by getting rid of mail-in ballots, they can't. And even worse, you make it too expensive for them to vote by demanding they pay a poll tax, which we all thought was outlawed by the the Voting Rights Act of 65, right? You charge them a poll tax by demanding they pay several $100s to show proof, so they can show proof of citizenship. It costs money to be able to prove your citizenship. A passport costs hundreds of dollars. Birth certificates, you don't have one. Some of you wrote to me and said you do, but most people don't have a birth certificate, and it takes time and money to go and get one from the city where you were born. Want to prove you're a citizen? Social Security card, okay? Takes time to get that. And God forbid you're a divorced woman who changed her name after she got married and then changed it back again after she got divorced. Good luck trying to keep your name on the voter rolls, right? You got to spend a fortune and time, which nobody has, if you're a woman, to prove you are who you claim to be. And that's okay with the Republicans, because Pastor Doug has said openly, women should not be allowed to vote. That's what the SAVE Act is all about. That's what it does. And this is what Donald Trump is pushing for right now. It forces people of color to show up in person to vote. It forces that people, disabled people, to show up in person and vote. Old people, people who don't have time to wait, sometimes 6, 10 hours to vote. We all know how Republican-controlled states suppress the vote. For Democrats, they suppress the vote. Before the election, they scrub the voting rolls. If you have a black-sounding last name, you may have to re-register. Oops, we're sorry. They make it so they scrub the voter rolls. That's the first thing they do. And then they make it impossible for people of color to vote, Latinos to vote, poor people to vote by limiting the number of polling precincts in those districts where poor people, black people, and Latinos live. They force these people to stand in line for hours to exercise their constitutional right to vote. Georgia. In 2021, Georgia passed the Election Integrity Act, making it a misdemeanor crime to hand a bottle of water or food to someone who has been standing in line to vote in Georgia. 12 months in jail, almost as long as the lines to vote in Georgia. 12 months in jail and a $1,000 fine. Now, you know what the weather's like in November in Georgia. Sometimes they have heat waves. We've seen people in Georgia passing out, old people passing out, waiting forever to vote because the Republican-controlled state makes sure that the districts where black people, poor people, and Hispanics live have very few places to vote. Now, that the courts have temporarily blocked that law, but in December of 2025, an appeals court reinstated it. So we don't know what's going to happen for the midterms. Right now, it's against the law to hand food or water to anybody who's been standing in line to vote. They do not want you to vote because they don't believe in a democratic republic. and they're being intellectually dishonest when they tell you why they want to pass the SAVE Act. They could never admit what they really want, which is poor people, black people, Latinos, and women to vote. They don't want that. So they're intellectually dishonest, and they say, certainly, why is it asking too much to insist that people prove they're citizens? Near the bottom of the show, I'm going to talk about the manifest dishonesty that I'm seeing in the attacks on Mayor Zohran Mamdani, the mayor of my great city. He issued a public statement earlier this week calling on the federal government to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. He's calling on Trump to hand Netanyahu over to the ICC. I'll get into this near the end of the show because it involves the mayor of New York and the situation in Gaza, and it needs a lot of time for me to explain to you why Michael Rapaport, the actor, Mobland, Murders, the Steve Martin and Marty Short show on Hulu, Michael Rapaport is really ignorant and should keep his mouth shut. He does. I'll explain to you why Michael Rapaport is an effing idiot. And I love his mother. I know his mother. And his stepfather. I love them with all my heart. And I think Michael Rapaport is a good actor. Just, he's very stupid. Very, very stupid. I'll just explain that, yes, we are not signatories, Michael, to the International Criminal Court. But that doesn't mean we don't turn over war criminals to the International Criminal Court. This is what's going on this week in New York City. You have people going after Zohran Mamdani, accusing him of being stupid for claiming that he wants the federal government to turn Benjamin Netanyahu over to the ICC. And they're going, he's so stupid. This is Michael Rapaport. Zohran Mamdani is so stupid. He doesn't know we're not signatories to the International Criminal Court. And as my father used to say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, especially in the shriveled mind of an actor like Michael Rapaport, who just knows that America is not a member of the International Criminal Court. But Michael Rapaport, who is very stupid, Michael Rapaport, a very stupid man, doesn't know that there's a long history of the United States, which is not a signatory to the ICC. You got that right, Michael Rapaport. The United States has a storied history of nabbing war criminals and delivering them to The Hague. But why would you expect a very stupid actor like Michael Rapaport, whose mother I love with all my heart, and his stepfather, I love them. But Michael Rapaport needs to keep his effing mouth shut and act. Good actor, but stupid, like most actors. You're stupid, Michael Rapaport. You're a very stupid, ill-informed ignoramus. So shut your effing mouth. By the way, Michael, that's an example of how you can express yourself without resorting to vulgarity. But you're stupid and ill-informed, so you have to spray saliva and expletives to get your stupid point across. Do not F with my mayor. Anybody who goes after Zohran Mamdani, I will rip your effing head off rhetorically, not physically. But you go after my mayor, I will defeat you. Not physically, but nobody attacks my mayor. Greatest mayor in the history of New York, in the history of America. He's a miracle. And if you attack my mayor, that speech, all right, I'm going to talk about that at the end of the show. But I've put everyone on notice. Everyone on notice. You say one bad word about my mayor, not only are you dead to me, I will rip your head off rhetorically. People don't know what they're talking about, or if they do, they're being intellectually dishonest. This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for joining me. Hi. It's going to be a long summer. I built a website. Go to davidfeldmanshow.com. And because I'm filled with piss and vinegar right now, I'm getting a great response to this website that I built all myself. I'm getting a great. Here's why it's great. It just has the essentials. If you want to read the stuff I read, like Michael Rapaport, the actor, whose mother I love with all my heart, and stepfather I love with all my heart. And I could love Michael Rapaport if he would just be an actor and keep his effing mouth shut. But he's stupid. He's stupid. So Michael Rapaport, if you're watching me, which you're probably not because you're stupid, but go to my website and there's a section called Show Prep. And you can read everything I read. I've tailored a news feed so people like Michael Rapaport. Did I mention he's stupid? Michael Rapaport is a very, very stupid actor. A good actor, but very stupid, who can't express himself unless he's cursing. So, Michael, if you're interested, go to davidfeldmanshow.com and you can read the legitimate news sources I read to prepare each and every episode. And it's refreshed every 15 minutes, which you should try. You should try refreshing your mind every 15 minutes, like reading a book, perhaps. And so my website refreshes every 15 seconds, and you get to see every article that sits on my desk before a show and after a show. Go to davidfeldmanshow.com. And I don't mean to be cruel to Michael Rapaport. You should not make fun of very, very, very stupid people like Michael Rapaport. So I apologize. It's cruel to point out that Michael Rapaport, good actor, effing idiot, and he should keep his mouth shut. He should only say things that have been handed to him by writers, except David Mamet, who's also become an idiot. Go to davidfeldmanshow.com and Show Prep. It's fantastic. And there's also what I call the Big Dig. I work off notes in order to do this nonsense, and I share. I am now, and a lot of you are thanking me for this. I have show notes, talking points that go into the preparation of this garbage, and it's like a play-at-home game. If you want to pretend you're David Feldman, go to davidfeldmanshow.com, hit the Big Dig, that's what I call it, the Big Dig, and you can download all my talking points, and then you can go host your own podcast or get on the phone with somebody and talk at them. The show notes are great. They're visually stunning as well. Okay. Please like this episode. Please share it and all the stuff that I ask you to do. Okay? Did I cover everything? Did I mention that Michael Rapaport is an idiot? That actors should keep their mouths shut when it comes to politics. Did I mention that? Did I mention that if you so much as raise an eyebrow of skepticism when it comes to my mayor, I will rip your effing head off rhetorically? Did I mention that? That anybody who criticizes Zohran Mamdani is dead to me? Did I mention that? I think he can be president. I think, they say he was born in Uganda. I'm a birther. I think he was really born in the United States. I want to see the birth certificate. I think Zohran Mamdani is lying to us and that he was born in America and therefore could run for the United States. I'm a birther. I want to see his birth certificate. Greatest human being. I love my mayor. And all of you who don't live in New York City are inferior because you all have to wake up to Donald Trump. You losers, you pathetic. I wake up to Zohran Mamdani. I have a spring in my step. I wake up every morning and think, my mayor is Zohran Mamdani. And that makes me better than you, unless you live in New York City. Yes, I live vicariously through other people. All right. Anybody still here? I don't know. I love Mamdani. Fired McKinsey, getting rid of the McKinsey consultants. The best. You want to feel good? Follow Zohran Mamdani. All right. Something remarkable is going on inside our legislative branch, but only on the surface. If you're squinting, you actually think, wow, Congress is doing something. For the second time in little more than, 5 weeks, the House of Representatives on Thursday passed a war powers resolution directing Donald Trump to end the bombing, the fighting in Iran, and to bring those troops newly deployed to the Middle East, bring them home. Passed in the Republican-controlled House. Again, first time it was a resolution introduced by New York Congressman Gregory Meeks. This one was introduced by Pramila Jayapal. Gregory Meeks said on the floor 2 days ago, we don't need to pass this. It's already been passed. So let me tell you why this bill, this war powers resolution, is intellectually dishonest, which it is. War Powers Act was passed in 1973 as we neared the end of the Vietnam War. Nixon was president. He opposed passage of the War Powers Act, but the democratically controlled House and Senate overrode his veto. You need 2/3 from both chambers to override a presidential veto. Now, under the War Powers Act, a president can fight a war for 60 days without congressional approval. After that, he must go before both chambers and get what is called an authorization for the use of military force. Iran, the war started on February 28th. On May 1st, May 1st, Donald Trump was supposed to go before Congress and get what is called an authorization for the use of military force. And so to exclude you from the process, they call it an AUMF, standing for Authorization for the Use of Military Force. And anybody who calls that an AUMF is an MFer. You can go MF yourself and your M. Because when you speak in shorthand about war, you're a disgusting human being. So by May 1st, when Donald Trump was supposed to go before Congress to get an AUMF, he began calling it a skirmish, not a war. It's not a war. If it's not a war, he thinks he doesn't need permission from Congress. Well, he does. So a couple of things here, because it's interesting, but it's an illusion and intellectually dishonest. Last month, for the first time in American history, both the House and the Senate passed a war powers resolution ordering Trump to end the war in Iran. It has never happened before. That's how unpopular this war is. And Trump said, well, it's not a binding resolution. I don't recognize the powers given to Congress in the War Powers Act to end the war. According to the War Powers Act, passed in 1973, all it takes is a concurrent resolution passed in both the House and the Senate with a simple majority for the president to be forced to end a war. And this is why you should download my show notes, because this will be what you're looking at right now. These are my show notes, and they're great. They'll help you learn this stuff. I need this stuff. I need the graphics to remember what a concurrent and a joint resolution is. So go to davidfeldmanshow.com. It's free. Download my show notes. The War Powers Act says with a simple majority, Congress, House, and Senate can pass what is called a concurrent resolution, and it's binding. The House and Senate passes it, but the president doesn't sign it because he doesn't have to. He can't. Got to bring the troops home. Now, this portion of the War Powers Act has never gone before the Supreme Court. Why? Well, because up until last month, the House and Senate never passed a concurrent resolution ordering a president to end a war that Trump insists is just a skirmish. It is generally agreed that should this ever go before the Supreme Court, the justices would rule that concurrent resolutions ordering an end to a war are unconstitutional. They have to be joint resolutions. Only joint resolutions have standing according to the Constitution and our Supreme Court. Concurrent resolutions are just the House and the Senate. Previous decisions by the Supreme Court ruled that concurrent resolutions, meaning they weren't signed by the president, they are non-binding unless they involve the day-to-day maintenance of the legislative branch. The only way to end a war, and this is what the Supreme Court would rule, I have no doubt, the only way to end a war is through a joint, not a concurrent, a joint resolution. And again, this is why you should go to my website and download the Big Dig, the show notes, because stuff like this is in there, and it will help you understand what you should have been taught in school and what the mainstream media should be hammering into your skull, but they don't. The only way to end a war, and this is what the Supreme Court no doubt would rule, the only way to end a war is through a joint, not a concurrent, a joint resolution. A joint resolution is passed in both houses of Congress and then requires one of two things: the president's signature. If he refuses to sign, that's called a veto, and then it requires a 2/3 majority in both chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate, to overturn a presidential veto. So, president vetoes a bill. The only way you can override that veto is a 2/3 majority in the House, in the Senate. That's what it says in the Constitution. Concurrent resolutions don't require a presidential signature. For example, The War Powers Act of 1973 was a joint resolution, not a concurrent resolution. It allows for a concurrent resolution to end a war, but in order for the War Powers Act of 1973 to become a law, it had to be a joint resolution, meaning both chambers of Congress passed it. It passed in the House, then it passed in the Senate, and then Richard Nixon, the president in 1973, vetoed it. And then both chambers, the House and the Senate, overrode Nixon's veto with a 2/3 majority, meaning it became the law of the land without the president's signature. That is how bills become law, through joint, not concurrent, joint resolutions. Joint, as in the legislative branch is joining with the executive branch, the White House, to pass the bill. A concurrent resolution is the Senate and the House concurring without consulting the president. They're kind of unconstitutional. So the courts have pretty much made it clear that if you bring this part of the War Powers Act, ending a war through concurrent resolution, we will rule concurrent resolutions to end a war are unconstitutional. It requires a joint resolution, not a concurrent resolution, meaning the president either signs it or if he vetoes it, you need 2/3 majorities in both chambers to override his veto. So what's going on right now with the passage of these resolutions to end the war in Iran, these are historic. We've never seen this much opposition to a war. But it's intellectual dishonesty. It's politicians using something of no value for political cover. And that's why the War Powers Resolution will never go before the Supreme Court. Congress doesn't want to take this before the Supreme Court because they need the symbolism of being able to pass a toothless War Powers Resolution demanding that the president end a war. They want the symbolism. They want the illusion that they're doing something to end the war, even though what they're doing signifies nothing. Intellectual dishonesty. They're wasting time doing this. Now, and this is why the Republicans may be right. Maybe we should dissolve our Democratic Republican. But I love this stuff because I think it's the only way to arrive at the truth, and the only way for justice is through the mess that is Washington, D.C. So the resolution, this is going to piss you off if you're still listening, and I don't know why you would be, but you're going to get really angry. And if you live in Michigan or Pennsylvania, you're going to get really angry, okay? So, again, Congress bravely voted for a toothless resolution. The House bravely voted on Thursday, end the war, Mr. President, and it passed 214 to 208. Remember, the Republicans control the House of Representatives, and Trump controls Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker. 4 Republicans voted in favor of the concurrent resolution, the toothless concurrent resolution to end the war. All right? One of them was the very brave and yet despicable Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky. He's out. He got primaried by Trump. he's good on some things, but in the end, he's despicable. So he voted for ending the war, as did Warren Davidson of Ohio, Tom Barrett of Michigan, and Brian Fitzpatrick. They all joined the Republicans to vote to end the war. Again, Massey was primaried out of office by Trump, but the other three, well, they're in tough re-election races, so they took a vote. They cast a vote to end the war because they knew it was for show. And they can be intellectually dishonest, go home to their constituents and say, I tried to end it. I hear you. I voted to end the war. The War Powers Act is irrelevant. It is irrelevant, okay? There's only one way to end a war. Voting on a war powers resolution is intellectually dishonest because it creates the illusion that people in Congress are trying to end the war. There is only one way to end this war, and that is don't give Pete Hegseth the $75 billion he wants to continue it. There's your War Powers Act. You cut funding for the war. And president can't do anything. If you're not going to the only thing the president can sign or not sign is a bill presented to him. President can't introduce bills. President can't introduce a funding bill. So all you have to do is not put a bill funding the war on his desk. There's nothing for him to veto. There's no war. It's that simple. It is that simple. If you're against the war, don't fund it. Kind of like having a child who's a drug addict. It's very hard to cut a child off who's a drug addict. Very hard. If you don't want your child to do drugs, it doesn't always work. I mean, a kid is going to do drugs. It's very complicated. But you're told, don't fund the habit. Don't give Pete Hegseth, alcoholic, purportedly, $75 billion he wants to continue this war. It's over. War, as John and Yoko said, war is over if you want it. It's really that simple. One day before Congress passed the War Powers Resolution ordering an end to the fighting, so on Thursday, end the war. End the war. That was one day after it funded the war. It passed the $95 billion war supplemental, giving Hegseth, $75 billion out of that to keep the same war Congress voted to end on Thursday going. So on Wednesday, here's your money for the war. On Thursday, end this war. So you get to go home and say, I voted against the war. Or, I funded the war. I funded our troops. Wait, it gets worse. It gets a lot worse. Thomas Massey of Kentucky and Davidson of Ohio, the two Republicans, Wednesday, they voted no on the supplemental. Thursday, they voted yes on the war resolution to end the war. So they're consistent. They have nothing to apologize for. If you live in Michigan or Pennsylvania, you need to show up at the town halls. Republicans, Tom Barrett of Michigan and Brian Fitzpatrick, Well, on Thursday, they voted to end the war. 24 hours after voting to fund it. Or as John Kerry famously said while running for president in 2004, I was for it before I was against it, or I was against it before I was for it, something like that. Yeah. If you're a voter in Michigan or Pennsylvania, you should go to, I don't know if they're going to hold town halls, but Tom Barrett of Michigan and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. And I know Brian Fitzpatrick is in a tough race in Pennsylvania. Somebody needs to ask them, why did you vote to end the war in Iran on a Thursday, 24 hours after you voted to fund it? And they'll say, because I figured nobody understood this. And now I'm going to give you an answer that you won't understand. Now, to be fair, the funding bill was merely a framework for a supplemental. Do I have to explain to you what a supplemental is or a framework? I've been over what I'm not going to explain to you you know that. And now the framework for the supplemental for the war goes before the Senate to be ironed out, and then an actual supplemental, if it gets through the Senate, will go back to the House to be voted on. Mike Johnson calls it Reconciliation 3.0 because the Senate has something called the filibuster. But if it's a budget bill, it can be passed with a simple majority under a very complex process called reconciliation. You only need a simple majority. But Donald Trump is attaching the SAVE Act to this supplemental. And the SAVE Act is not a budget bill, so it can't be passed through reconciliation. And Trump is now threatening Republicans to get rid of the filibuster, or else. He said, I'm being very patient with John Thune, the Republican Senate leader, but if he doesn't get rid of the filibuster, there's going to be a price to pay. Hegseth was on Capitol Hill Tuesday saying he runs out of money on August 1st. That's what he said. We're running out of money. We won't have any money left to fund the war. So Mike Johnson was able, that's not Mike Johnson. Where's Mike Johnson? Under S for shit. S? Oh, I can't find it. Well, all these turds look alike. Why not Rubio? I should be showing you a picture of Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson was able to pass the framework of a war supplemental. And with, 8 days to go before the war in Iran is completely out of money, he did the most responsible thing. He gave the House of Representatives the entire rest of the summer off. I think that deserves something, don't you? The war is so important, and our troops are so important, and they need the funding. It's so important. Everybody go home for 5 weeks. That's how important it is. They don't return until probably right after Labor Day. Maybe before, we don't know. We'll see. That's how popular the war in Iran is. The Pentagon runs out of money on August 1st. Mike Johnson tells the House, take 5 weeks off. When they come back at the end of August or right after Labor Day, they have exactly 1 month to pass the 2027 budget, which is not going to happen. We need a new budget by October 1st. or the government shuts down. You know this drill. We've been over it. Fiscal year 2026 ends October 1st, 2026, October 1st, 2027. The new budget is supposed to kick in. And because they suck at what they do, and they do suck, they've already passed a continuing resolution in the House to keep the government open until December 4th of this year. Continuing resolutions which you pass to continue the government spending when there's no budget. They'll call it a CR to make it look like, ooh, but it's a continuing resolution, which means we're going to continue funding the government at previous year levels until we can come up with this year's budget to avoid a shutdown. So the House voted to keep the government open until December 4th of this year, to keep spending levels commensurate to 2026 spending until they can cobble together a 2027 budget. That now goes before the Senate. There has never been a more ineffective House of Representatives than the one under Mike Johnson. They accomplish nothing. They do nothing. They only hurt poor people. They only hurt the working poor. They can't even pass a budget. These are Republicans, We're fiscally responsible. We're the party of the bankers and the stockbrokers and the hedge fund managers, and they can't even pass a budget by October 1st. They say, well, at the earliest, we need until December 4th. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. There's Mike Johnson. Well, why are you hiding there, Mikey? I couldn't find you. There you are. There you are. Don't be afraid. Check out davidfeldmanshow.com. Go to show prep, and it's refreshed all day. It's everything that sits on my desk. And you can be as annoying as David Feldman. You can think you know more than you actually do, just like David Feldman. And if you want the notes for today's show, hit the Big Dig. I call it the Big Dig so you can dig in deeper. But it's really just my talking points so you can remember what I've been talking about. All right. We'll continue. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping things civil. And if I make any mistakes, let me know. Hit the contact button over at davidfeldmanshow.com. If you want to correct me, I love being corrected. I love issuing corrections. Notice I don't make too many. I want to issue corrections. I don't really make too many mistakes. I triple check my facts. All right, let's continue, shall we? Where is he? There he is. In 2002, George W. Bush secured an authorization for the use of military force, an AUMF, to attack Iraq, which he then went on to do in 2003, and we know how that ended. But despite being incredibly stupid and irresponsible, Bush did demand the vote on that authorization for the use of military force. He demanded it be taken before the 2002 midterms, I think it was in October, right before the midterms. Democrats controlled the Senate in 2002. GOP controlled the House. And a lot of people didn't trust George W. Bush in 2002. But a lot of Democrats who voted against the war authorization for the first Gulf War ended up regretting that vote because the first Gulf War turned out to be a political winner, at least until Election Day 1992. So a lot of Democrats heading into the midterms of 2002, well, they voted for the war authorization to invade Iraq because clearly after 9/11, George W. Bush wouldn't lie to us. Again, the Democrats controlled the Senate under the leadership of Tom Daschle, who's now a lobbyist. Tom Daschle. They voted for, in the Senate, they voted for the war authorization. Democrats could have stopped the invasion of Iraq. They voted for the war authorization. And then the midterms came a couple weeks later, and they lost the Senate. The Democrats lost the Senate, and we lost Iraq. War authorizations must be renewed by Congress. The authorization for the use of military force against Iraq has expired. But the authorization for the use of military force to fight a global war on terror, Bush got that passed in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and it's still very much in effect to fight a global war on terror. How do you fight a war on terror? Well, you fight terrorists like Antifa. If something's a terror, if somebody's a part of a terrorist group, if you label Antifa a terrorist group, which Donald Trump has done, and Marco Rubio has labeled Antifa, which doesn't exist, a foreign terrorist organization, you can now go after Antifa, which doesn't exist, and you have the authorization to do so because the authorization for the use of military force to fight a global war on terror passed weeks, days after 9/11, keeps getting renewed to fight a global war on terror. What's a terrorist? Whatever the president decides is a terrorist. And right now, Donald Trump and Marco Rubio have decided Antifa, which doesn't exist, is a terrorist organization. Therefore, if you have Antifa sympathies, if you're an immigrant, Marco Rubio, thanks to 1950 laws passed in the 1950s to throw communists out of this country, Marco Rubio can throw you out of the United States for having Antifa sympathies, for leftist thinking. We just deported Beto Corral, a progressive left-wing activist from Colombia living here for the past 11 years, never broke a law other than he wrote articles supporting the presidential candidate in Colombia who Donald Trump didn't want to win. And a knock on his door, Pedro Corral, read about Pedro Corral, late June, there was a knock on his door, lived in Texas. It was ICE. And they had a warrant for his arrest. Spent 3 weeks in ICE detention facilities for the crime of wanting the current president of Colombia's party. They wanted that candidate to win the presidential race in Colombia instead of the crypto-fascist who ended up winning, who Marco Rubio and Donald Trump support. He gets sworn in, I think, the first week of August. That's how it works. And if you're an American citizen and you have Antifa sympathies, you can be detained. My father enlisted to fight fascism. Antifa. So that's the war authorization to fight a global war on terror that they voted for like a week after 9/11. It wasn't a war authorization to invade Afghanistan because Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. So they generalized this war authorization. The Taliban were not behind 9/11. I keep telling you this, and nobody can prove otherwise. Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. But he couldn't prove that the Taliban were behind 9/11. So it was this generalized war authorization to fight a global war on terror, and George W. Bush would just have to be trusted to know where terror was. Well, what are you going to do? You invade Afghanistan. Can't invade Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. They're our allies. They're our good friends who financed 9/11. You can't attack our friends just because they brought down the World Trade Center and flew a plane into our Pentagon. Never forget they flew a plane into the Pentagon. Think about that. They flew a plane into our Pentagon. So we invaded Afghanistan. Bin Laden moved into Pakistan, where he lived for, a decade? And he's still a national hero among some. It took a joint military and CIA operation to kill bin Laden about 10 years after 9/11. The Pakistani doctor who cooperated with the CIA by giving out free polio vaccines in Abbottabad, which is where bin Laden was living, the Pakistani doctor set up this ruse to give out free polio vaccines in order to extract the DNA necessary to prove this was, in fact, Osama bin Laden. That doctor, who is responsible for our avenging 9/11 and killing bin Laden, that doctor who cooperated with the United States and the CIA, he is sitting inside a Pakistani prison tonight because Osama bin Laden is a hero in Pakistan. But we couldn't attack Pakistan for 9/11 because they're our friends. So we attacked Afghanistan. But it was a war authorization that didn't specify Afghanistan because George Bush couldn't, just trust me on this. That war authorization to fight this global war on terror, in effect, ever since, it's what every president since has used to justify what Teddy Roosevelt called splendid little wars, little excursions, attacks that last a couple of days, a few months, on and off a few years around the world. All the president has to do, thanks to war criminal George W. Bush, is label a country's leader a terrorist and then have the Secretary of State do it as well. Then under the authorization to use military force against global terrorism passed in 2001, that president has the right to bomb or invade any country he deems fit. And as long as it doesn't last more than 60 days, he doesn't have to ask for permission from Congress. Thank you, George W. Bush. The invasion of Venezuela at the beginning of 2026 to kidnap its president, Nicolas Maduro, was legally justified because Trump, in 2025, labeled Maduro the leader of a terrorist organization that was sending an army of gangs into America to sell drugs, to rape, to murder, to kidnap, and steal our natural resources. He labeled Nicolas Maduro a terrorist leader, as did Marco Rubio. That was in 2025, laying the groundwork for an invasion of Venezuela because it has the largest known oil reserves in the world, much bigger than Saudi Arabia's. And Marco Rubio is the viceroy of Venezuela right now. They have to ask, that government has to ask Marco Rubio for permission on how it spends its money. And they are able to do this all under the auspices of the 2001 authorization for the use of military force to fight a global war on terrorism, which Congress renews every time it's about to expire, even though it is the role of Congress to declare war. Donald Trump, since returning to office, has attacked, I think it's 7 separate countries around the world. And he's planning to go into Mali. And I think that makes it the 8th country. And it's all legal because Congress continues to renew a 25-year-old war authorization to fight a global war on terror, which is why we lasted more than 2 decades in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban, who had as much to do with 9/11 as Saddam Hussein. Nothing. Zero. Zip. Nada. Close to 2,500 U.S. soldiers died fighting the Taliban, who had nothing to do with 9/11. And many of those soldiers are buried inside Section 60 of Arlington Cemetery. They call it 14 acres of sacred land. That's what they call Section 60, where the soldiers are buried, the ones who died in Afghanistan. And you're not allowed to use Section 60 for political photo ops. You're not allowed to. It's against the law. You're not allowed to photograph the tombstones, not for political or commercial use. But that didn't stop Donald Trump from defiling Section 60 in August of 2024 while running for president, when he brought a group of Gold Star families to pose in front of their loved ones' tombstones, commemorating what Trump called Joe Biden's bungled pullout from Afghanistan 3 years earlier. Remember that? Trump posed in front of the graves against the law with his thumbs up. Look at this. Look at this. Thumbs up, smiling, in direct violation of the law and human decency. When a female employee of Arlington Cemetery tried to prevent Trump and his political entourage from entering Section 60, well, she had to call the police because she claims they physically assaulted this woman, always a woman, right? And she told police Trump's campaign staff shoved her out of the way. In the end, she didn't file an official complaint with the police. Why? Because she told them, if I file an official complaint, I'm afraid my name will be publicized and his supporters, Donald Trump's supporters, will come after me. Pete Hegseth, America's Secretary of Defense, is a racist, a white Christian nationalist whose body is slathered in neo-Nazi tattoos. An Islamophobic and, according to multiple women, including his own mother, an abuser of women and alcohol. By many accounts, Pete Hegseth was and may still be an alcoholic. Now, he promised to quit drinking if the Senate confirmed him as Secretary of Defense. But according to the great congressman from Maryland, Democrat Jamie Raskin, yesterday, Jamie Raskin says it appears that Hegseth, that his promise to quit drinking appears to be dubious. Jamie Raskin is asking for proof that Pete Hegseth actually kept his promise and quit drinking. Pete Hegseth testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee on Tuesday asking for more money to fight his failed war in Iran, and it was one of the worst displays of cowardice I have ever witnessed. I thought of playing clips, but why? Why? Hegseth was asking for more money because, he insisted, we're running low on munitions, and this is an emergency. That's what he said publicly, but if I say that, or the media reports it, that's giving aid and comfort to the enemy. He said if Congress doesn't authorize an additional, let's say, $67 billion over and above the $1 trillion he already got for 2026, he would have to suspend crucial training for our military, and of course, that would endanger their lives. Well, Democrats on the committee, especially Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff, he's running for re-election down in Georgia, he's leading in the polls. Jon Ossoff read Pete Hegseth's words back to him. Words Pete Hegseth has used since the war began on February 28th. Hegseth repeatedly has said in the lead up and following Tuesday's testimony, these are the words that were read back to him. This is what Pete Hegseth still says. Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory. Well, Jon Ossoff, as well as other Democrats on the committee, said, is that true, Mr. Hegseth? You said that. If it's true, if it's a historic and overwhelming victory, why are you coming to us for more money? And Hegseth hid behind the troops. Pure cowardice. He said, such a question, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's pretty much what he said. He said, such a question dishonors the soldiers who just died on this mission. Mr. Hegseth, you have repeatedly said, and I quote, Iran's military had been rendered combat ineffective for years to come, unquote. And yet now the Strait of Hormuz remains shut, no way to open it, and you need more money. So do you stand by that statement? And Hegseth's response was pure cowardice. you are dishonoring not just the troops who have made the ultimate sacrifice, but also their loved ones who have yet to even bury them. And no doubt Donald Trump will pose in front of their tombstones when Trump needs another photo op for the 2028 presidential election. And yes, he's running. He was asked, Mr. Hegseth, you repeatedly claim that in our battle with Iran, we have, quote, achieved every single objective, unquote. Do you stand by those words? Quote, we've achieved every single objective? Looking at the current situation, was this your objective? And again, Pete Hegseth, a coward behind our troops, and claimed, for you to say something like that dishonors the memory of the great men and women who, unlike you, Senator, are willing to put their lives on the line every single day for the freedoms you take for granted. A few good men, Jack Nicholson. I mean, he's just quoting from Quentin Tarantino. Remember when Hegseth, he's such a douchebag. Remember when he quoted the Bible? But it was Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction. And now he's just parroting Jack Nicholson's testimony written by the mediocre Aaron Sorkin and A Few Good Men. And I'm being generous calling Aaron Sorkin mediocre. Yeah. He was doing Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men. Answer the question, Mr. Hegseth. You're asking for close to $70 billion more dollars. If what you said was true, that we've achieved every single objective and the Iranian military is no longer combat effective, why do you need more money? You claim repeatedly that the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the sea, that, quote, their missile and drone capability are destroyed and combat ineffective. If that's the case, Mr. Hegseth, why can't ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz? If that's the case, why would it be a bloodbath for America's military to seize Karg Island and hold it, or hold Hormuz? That's the Bab el-Mandab Strait. I'm going to get to that in a second. Do we have Hormuz? There's Hormuz. That's the Bab el-Mandab Strait. This is Hormuz. Hegseth's response was like, why can't we seize Hormuz? Why can't we take Karg Island? Why? And Hegseth's response was, Senator, we have the greatest fighting force known to man, and for you to say they aren't capable of winning this war, that they cannot win, you're giving aid and comfort to the enemy. And once again, Senator, this is a blatant, un-American attempt to break the spirit of our brave men and women in uniform. This kind of talk not only makes their sacred job difficult, it endangers their lives. But, Senator, that obviously doesn't matter to you, since you're obviously unwilling to give them the money they so desperately need to finish the job. I'm basically paraphrasing what this douchebag, Pete Hegseth, this coward cowering behind our troops, said. Hegseth frames any criticism of him as criticism of our men and women in uniform, leaving out conveniently that he's being criticized to protect our men and women in uniform, so a crazed ultra-right-wing Christian nationalist whose body is slathered in neo-Nazi tattoos doesn't send our soldiers off to fight another meaningless, stupid war because Donald Trump can't admit he effed up. Any criticism of the war is an unpatriotic attack against our soldiers and America. And I have a friend who's a lawyer down in Texas saying the same thing. And it's as old as the bullet. It's as old as gunpowder. When you don't support a war, you hate our country. When you don't want our soldiers to come home maimed, wounded, or dead, you hate them. When you question the motive behind a war, you dishonor the memory of our soldiers. Hegseth, it was, I'd say it was embarrassing, but these days, you got Trump now calling Democrats communists. Like he's saying you vote for, I wish. I'd give anything for Chuck Schumer to be a communist. So Hegseth claims our soldiers are fighting for freedom, and yet he insists United States senators are not free to criticize or even question why and how this war is being lost. Lost. You're all about accountability, Pete Hegseth, when it comes to denying blacks and women and Hispanics promotions inside the Pentagon. We're all about accountability, except when it's your accountability. You have failed. You have failed. And instead of doing the honorable thing, Pete Hegseth, and turning yourself in to the International Criminal Court, you cower behind our troops and our flag. And some version of the New Testament, which I'm pretty sure is just the Old Testament that Jews don't follow. The only people who follow what the Bible that you read from, that was why the Talmud was written, because some of that stuff is, 2,000 years old, 1,500 years old? Nobody follows it except crazy Christians. Even crazy Orthodox Jews don't adhere to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. But here we are. Here we are. He's the Christian. He's the Christian. Can't quote the New Testament. He's the Christian who can only quote parts of the Bible nobody's too proud of. The Old Testament, parts of the Old Testament that nobody's proud of. So he says, members of Congress, you should just accept my word. Cut me a blank check. This war is a success, and we've achieved all our objectives, despite Hegseth and Trump constantly changing their explanation for why this war was necessary. Now it's to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. We've been over this. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. They haven't had one since 2003. But this is, first, we went in because they were an imminent threat. That's why we had to go in. We had to attack Iran on February 28th because they were an imminent threat to our soldiers. Marco Rubio, and I love this. Marco Rubio has turned into one of the worst human beings in the world. Marco Rubio. I love this. Marco Rubio, when the bombing campaign began, our Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, when the bombing campaign began, he said it was a war of necessity because we had good intelligence that Iran was about to attack American bases and soldiers spread throughout the Persian Gulf. Really? Why, Marco Rubio? Why would Iran attack our bases and our soldiers, which they've done? And Marco Rubio said, and I'm not making this up, Marco Rubio said, we had actionable intelligence that Iran was about to attack our Persian Gulf bases because we were about to attack Iran. And our intelligence agencies confirmed that if we were to attack Iran, Iran would respond by attacking our troops stationed in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and all those other oil-rich nations in that region. First, as tragedy, then as farce. First as tragedy, then as farce. Marco Rubio said we had to attack Iran because they were an imminent threat to our troops stationed in the Persian Gulf because we were going to attack Iran. And why are you going to attack Iran? Because they would end up attacking us after we attack them. First as tragedy, then as farce. That was Marco Rubio's first explanation for the war. Then, when our soldiers died in Kuwait, because we moved them forward without any protection, they changed the explanation for why we were doing this, because it was obviously not to protect our troops. We would have put them in safer spots, not left them out in the open, vulnerable to Iranian attacks in Kuwait. So then it was regime change. Trump saw massive protests against the Iranian leadership in early January, and there were. And so he said by bombing and killing the Ayatollah as well as his top military commanders, which we did, the Iranian people would rise up, which they didn't. They did not coalesce a free and open democracy, which we knew wasn't going to happen. Mossad, Israeli intelligence Mossad, and the CIA told Trump and Netanyahu, you can kill as many Ayatollahs as you want. The people aren't going to rise up. It's only going to make the regime stronger. So, obviously, it wasn't about regime change. Then it was about destroying Iran's drone and ballistic missile capability. And honestly, I like that. That's a good one, because Iran had and still does have ballistic missiles that can reach London. They do. They have ballistic missiles that can reach London. They have hundreds of thousands of drones that render Israel, as well as America's and the Persian Gulf's, those trillion-dollar anti-missile system defenses are defenseless against the hundreds of thousands of attack drones that Iran has. We have to spend $3 million, maybe $2 to knock one $20,000 Iranian drone out of the sky. That's unsustainable, which is why the Persian Gulf countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, are buying drones from Ukraine. So we're letting them get a nuclear power plant in Saudi Arabia because we're losing Saudi Arabia, and that's bad for Jared Kushner. But I like that excuse. That's a good excuse. I don't want Iran to have ballistic missiles. I don't want Iran to be able to bomb London or Israel or Kuwait. Not even Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, I like that excuse. Let's drop bombs on Iran's bombs. Let's drop bombs on their drones. Let's destroy their missile and drone-making capability. I like that idea. I don't want Iran to have that. I agree wholeheartedly. I do not want Iran to have ballistic missiles or drones. I don't want them to have warehouses storing missiles and drones that are used to kill American soldiers stationed in Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. Yeah, I want you to destroy their ballistic missile and drone capability. They shouldn't have factories producing these lethal weapons. And I'm being serious. Sometimes I'm being sarcastic. Iran shouldn't have that. I don't want that. Here's the problem. They shouldn't have that. But it turns out bombing bombs doesn't work. And we know that, but we did it anyway. Bombing bombs doesn't work. I wish it did. It doesn't. I wish, it feels good to spend $1 trillion a year and think, oh, we have the most powerful military in the world and we don't have to shed any blood. We can just dictate what's going to happen because we'll just bomb your bombs. They shouldn't have ballistic missiles or drones. Iran shouldn't. And since we spend $1 trillion a year, we should be able to make Iran obey us. Well, despite hitting close to 20,000 targets in Iran, Israel and the United States barely made a dent in Iran's supply of or ability to produce ballistic missiles and attack drones. Haven't made an effing dent. That's according to our own intelligence estimates. Our own intelligence agencies are saying right now, if we resume bombing, which what are we on our 12th day now? It's not going to open Hormuz, and it's not going to make a dent in their drone and ballistic missile capability. Why? Because I've been telling you this for years. Wars are never won from above. It would be nice to believe that. The air shows, the Blue Angels, makes us feel safe, but it's the illusion of safety. They couldn't stop the planes from going into the Pentagon. They couldn't stop a plane from going into a Pentagon on September 11th. We should be able to stop that. We should be making a dent in Iran's drone and ballistic missile capability. We should be able to do that because Iran should not have those weapons. There is what should be and what is. And the Republicans are very good when they're explaining why they have to cut food stamps, Medicaid. They say, well, we should be able to feed everybody, but there is what there is, and we don't have enough money, and we need to be realistic. But when it comes to fighting imaginary enemies and forever wars, they live in fantasy world. There's no difference between should and what isn't. I don't know if that made sense. There are a lot of mountains in Iran. And in those mountains, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of man-made caves carved into those mountains. And, you know, we have 30,000-pound bunker busters, but they cannot pierce deep enough into a mountain to destroy the armaments, the warehouses, and factories producing and housing all those ballistic missiles and drones. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has spent 40 years, 50 years planning for this war. America, our plan for this war with Iran, Trump was caught on tape on July 21st, 2021, in front of total strangers who were visiting his Bedminster, New Jersey golf club. He was caught on tape, audio, waving our Pentagon's classified war plans for the invasion of Iran. Do you remember that? Do you remember that? He was no longer president. He was holding on to thousands of classified documents, refusing to turn them over to our government, probably for leverage to threaten certain people with as Jack Smith's prosecutions heated up. He was caught on tape talking to two ghostwriters for his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows was working on an autobiography. And they taped their conversation with Donald Trump, who was surrounded by other members of the Bedminster Golf Club. And he was waving the plans for a preemptive strike against Iran, given to him by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, Mark Milley. And he's caught on tape. You can hear the paper rustling. And he says, quote, "I probably shouldn't be showing you this. They're classified." Really? You shouldn't be showing classified war plans to invade Iran. So I'm not saying Iran got its hands on those war plans, although I think those two ghostwriters of Mark Meadows' autobiography should be questioned. I mean, as long as you're bringing in Jim Comey and Letitia James, I'd like to speak to Mark Meadows' two ghostwriters, you saw the plans to invade Iran. Did you talk to anybody afterwards from Iran? But I'm not saying Iran got its hands on those plans. I'm not. I'm saying Donald Trump is stupid and irresponsible. And he had no plans when he went into Iran because there weren't plans for this war in Iran. Because if there were plans, he wouldn't have attacked Iran because he would have known the risks were too great and that you can't bomb bombs. You have to send in ground troops, hundreds of thousands of ground troops who have to go door to door, cave to cave, in order to take control of Iran's missile, drone, and nuclear bomb capability. Can't do it from the air. Remember, in June of 2025, we bombed, supposedly, their nuclear weapon plant that didn't exist. Can't do it from the air. And if there were actual plans for this war in Iran, Trump would have known that Iran would very likely shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and there would be nothing our military could do about it. Absolutely nothing. Nothing. Now, we should be able to do something about it, but there's a difference between what we should be able to do and what we can do. And if you don't know the difference, you end up face down in a puddle of your own piss and feces and blood in a bar. I should be able to punch that 30-year-old, 6'5" kid with that beautiful girlfriend who pisses me off because he's driving a Porsche. I should be able to walk up to this guy and punch him in front of his girlfriend and humiliate him for being young, handsome, tall, muscular, buff, with a beautiful girlfriend and a brand new Porsche. I should be able to punch him. I should, but I can't. And so I end up lying on the floor, covered in sawdust, my own blood, feces, urine, and semen, because that's the only way I get aroused. But that's for another show. Okay. It would be nice if we could open Hormuz militarily. But you have to send hundreds of thousands of troops in to secure Hormuz. And the bloodshed would be too steep a price for anyone. For anyone. And now we are seeing the Houthis, and this is what really makes me angry. I mean, a lot of things make me angry, but this is... We're now seeing the Houthis threatening to close down the Bab el-Mandab Strait. What is the Bab el-Mandab Strait? Well, I told you about the Bab el-Mandab Strait months ago. The Bab el-Mandab Strait, to put it simply, is to the Suez Canal what Hormuz is to the Persian Gulf. Trump this week was asked about the Houthis firing on Saudi ships in the Red Sea. The Red Sea is the gateway to the Suez Canal, where, 40% of the world's shipping containers have to pass through? Something like 8% of the world's oil, most of it goes through Hormuz. Most oil, 20%, 25% of the oil goes through Hormuz, but our world economy goes through the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait to get through the Suez Canal. Trump was asked about the Houthis firing on Saudi ships in the Red Sea, which is beginning to happen. The war is spreading. The Iranians say, wow, they can't open up Hormuz. Why don't we shut down the Bab el-Mandab Strait? And Trump, straight-faced, said, what about the Houthis shutting down the Bab el-Mandab Strait? He said, we can take care of that. We already did, quite frankly. We were very successful back in the spring of last year. Right. And as long as we're stupid, as long as we can't remember, that sounds about right. But it's wrong. It's completely, utterly wrong. Do you remember when we bombed the Houthis? Do you remember that? Remember we bombed Yemen? Remember that? It was Pete Hegseth's finest moment. Remember? Nobody looks at a map. Nobody remembers all these bombing campaigns because there's so many. Pete Hegseth's finest moment. The Houthis, a mountain people, they now have taken control of most of Yemen and are waging war on and off against its neighbor to the north, Saudi Arabia. The Houthis are allied with Iran, partly because Saudi Arabia is primarily Sunni and the Houthis and the Iranians are primarily Shia. That's part of the reason the Houthis and the Iranians are allies. Also because Saudi Arabia and Iran are two of the largest oil producers in that region, so they're fighting for geopolitical and economic control of the Middle East, and they fight over ideology. For example, ideologically, Iran, brace yourself for this. Iran believes in something resembling a democracy. Saudi Arabia does not. It's a kingdom. Iran, I hate to break it to you, I know Pete Hegseth would say this is un-American. Iran has a president. I think they have elections every 4 years. Pezeshkian, I think, was elected 2 years ago. They have a parliament. They have a speaker of the parliament. The speaker went to Pakistan to negotiate with J.D. Vance. They have an army. They have a navy. They have their Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is kind of like an extrajudicial Air Force, Army, and Navy. Some say it's their real military, so that when Pete Hegseth says we've destroyed the Iranian army, he's conveniently left out, yeah, but you haven't touched the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They're the real military in Iran because they answer to the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, who's more powerful than the president of Iran. The Ayatollah is more powerful than the Speaker of the Parliament. He's more powerful than the Parliament. But compared to Saudi Arabia, which is led by one man, MBS, Iran has elections and something resembling a government that's responsive to the people, at least compared to Saudi Arabia, which attacked us on 9/11. Iran it would be nice to get rid of the Ayatollah. Iran, not defending Iran. They've killed our soldiers in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. They kill our soldiers. So I'm not going to defend Iran. They are our enemy. But they weren't behind 9/11 the way Saudi Arabia was and Pakistan. And they have something resembling a government of and for the people when you compare it to Saudi Arabia, which we're giving nuclear technology to. Now Trump is saying that Saudi Arabia has to recognize Israel. They already did recognize Israel, just not officially. They've recognized Israel for the past, I would say, since, well, they have something resembling a government, which is why no matter how many members of the Iranian government, military, and theocracy we kill, they're able to find replacements. It's not a cult of personality. Everybody is replaceable in Iran. That's why the decapitation isn't working. Is it an oppressive regime? Of course it is. But this is a regime that allows protests up to a point. It has a history of protesting that it puts up with until it doesn't. It is a regime with a semblance of self-rule, elections, a functioning parliament, and most importantly, at the very top, it's rule by committee. It is an oppressive regime, but they rule through a consensus. Not so much a consensus of the people, it's a consensus of the people who control the levers of power. So parliament, the speaker, the military, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the president, the Ayatollah, the people, I forgot what they call the people who surround the Ayatollah. It's a consensus, not a democracy, but it is a consensus, unlike Saudi Arabia. Yes, thousands before the bombing campaign were killed and arrested for protesting in Iran. But there is still something resembling a push and pull inside the Iranian power structure. Saudi Arabia, no room for dissent. And they attacked us on 9/11. And Trump wants to give them our nuclear technology. Saudi Arabia is a dictatorial kingdom, so they are our allies. They are our allies. They're going to get permission to enrich uranium and produce their own nuclear power, which is very easy to purify and become weapons grade. Not that difficult to produce weapons grade uranium. The hard part is figuring out how to put it on the tip of a ballistic missile and designing a trigger that sets the nuclear bomb off over your enemy and not inside your lab. Okay. So Trump said, I'm not worried about the Houthis closing off the Bab el-Mandab Strait. He said, we already dealt with them last year. No, you didn't. You're a liar. You're a liar. You bombed Yemen. You bombed the Houthis, but you didn't deal with them. You bombed civilians. You committed war crimes. You took out civilian infrastructure, killing women and children, and you bombed a refugee camp which was home to hundreds of Somalis. And then afterwards, you declared victory and you stopped. You said the Houthis will never again fire on ships in the Red Sea again, and they will never fire missiles into Israel. That's what you said, Mr. President. But the Houthis continue to fire on ships in the Red Sea, firing on Saudi tankers now. And they continue to fire missiles into Israel. But who in America can read a map and know that the Bab el-Mandab Strait, if the Houthis shut it down, they will shut down the Suez Canal? And who can remember all the countries we bombed and accomplished nothing? Who can remember? Who can keep track of all of Pete Hegseth's war crimes? There are too many to count. Among Hegseth's multiple war crimes is violating the same Espionage Act that Donald Trump violated when he waived those war plans to invade Iran at visitors to the Bedminster Golf Club. Jack Smith, the special counsel, indicted Trump for violating the Espionage Act because Trump was caught on tape waiving classified Iranian war plans in front of complete strangers. If you love our soldiers as much as Trump claims, you don't turn Arlington Cemetery into a photo app, and you don't endanger their lives by waiving Iranian war plans in front of complete strangers. And people I talk to who defend this idiot who's our commander-in-chief, they said to me, well, he waived a war plan to invade Iran, but not the war plan. So it wasn't really bad. That's the excuse. They said to me, as though they know anything, it was an obsolete war plan. It was, at the very least, 2 years old. They say within 2 years, those plans are completely antiquated because it's a fluid situation. And the Pentagon adjusts to conditions on the ground and they come up with new war plans. Well, here's the thing. Conditions on the ground don't change because the ground don't change. The impenetrable mountains are still there. The Strait of Hormuz is still there. Karg Island is still there. The conditions on the ground are not fluid. There's basically one war plan, and Trump was waiving it. It's the same plan we've had for decades, which is why up until Donald Trump, no president was ever stupid and irresponsible enough to think they could go to war with Iran just by dropping 20,000 bombs. Yes, we should be able to defeat Iran. We should be able to. And yes, we could defeat Iran, but it would require hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground, trillions of dollars, and gallons of blood. Is it worth it? Is it worth sacrificing the lives of our soldiers to fight a war with Iran because Donald Trump can't admit he's stupid? Are you willing to fight a war because Donald Trump can't admit he's stupid? Are you willing to fight a war? I agree. I don't want Iran to have ballistic missiles and drone capability. If only there were a better solution. You know, like the deal that Donald Trump tore up. Iran didn't have a nuclear weapons program. They never did. They were obeying the weapons inspectors. They were keeping their uranium at 3%. They didn't enrich it up to 60% until a couple of years after this POS of a president during his first term tore up the deal. Now, back to Yemen. Trump, had he not been elected in November 2024, would have been convicted of violating the Espionage Act. This was a slam dunk. Even Bill Barr, his former attorney general, said when he heard the tapes of Trump waiving the war plans for Iran, Bill Barr said, this is really bad. This is indefensible. I don't see how Jack Smith loses this. He would have been found guilty for violating the Espionage Act. And maybe one day Pete Hegseth, among his many war crimes, will also be tried for violating the Espionage Act. Because in the lead up to the bombing campaign over Yemen, do you remember this? This was in March of 2025. Our then National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, this genius, he ignored the rules and set up a group signal chat for all the White House national security principals to communicate over an unsecured line before, during, and after the bombing campaign took place over Yemen. Remember this? It's hard to keep track of all these war crimes, all these crimes this administration is guilty of. Now, this signal group chat taking place before, during, and after the illegal bombing campaign over Yemen was top secret. And the Russians and the Chinese can monitor all our unsecured lines, like a signal group chat that our then National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, was told, don't use it. It's not secure. But Mike Waltz knew better because was our National Security Advisor. So he set up an unsecured chat line that accidentally included a reporter from The Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg. Jeffrey Goldberg, a reporter from The Atlantic magazine, was included in this top secret group signal chat. Jeffrey Goldberg was literally sitting in a grocery store parking lot, staring at his phone, reading a group signal chat as our nation's highest security officials discussed and confirmed the time, place, and coordinates of airstrikes over Yemen. That's a violation of the Espionage Act. It endangers the lives of our pilots. But because Mike Waltz is a white man, it was decided, why destroy a man's reputation just because he's an irresponsible moron who endangered the lives of our pilots? So Trump made him our ambassador to the UN, and he gave Marco Rubio the job of National Security Advisor. So Marco Rubio is our Secretary of State and our National Security Advisor, just like Henry Kissinger was for Nixon, and we know how well that turned out. Henry Kissinger, great man, didn't commit any war crimes, really handled that power with equanimity, or however that's pronounced. Our defense chief, Pete Hegseth, should be arrested for many crimes, including violating the Espionage Act. He was in on that unsecured Signal group chat. And because it wasn't secure, he provided up-to-the-minute reports on the time, place, and coordinates of those airstrikes so that everyone included in that chat, including Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic, as well as the Russians and the Chinese, who have no problem intercepting those chats, he gave up-to-the-minute information that was classified, that either the Russians or the Chinese could have used to tip off Houthi fighters. We're beginning to hear that it was the Russians, Vladimir Putin, who helped the Iranians target the American embassy in Riyadh, where our CIA was headquartered, and that entire building, including the CIA offices, destroyed. Not only that, so it was Pete Hegseth who used that Signal group chat to divulge top secret information in real time as the airstrikes were going on. Not only that, Pete Hegseth also set up his own separate Signal group chat, told not to, did it anyway, because he knows what's best. And he also, in that separate group chat, gave up-to-the-minute information to his brother, his personal lawyer, and his wife, all in direct violation of the Espionage Act. And because Pete Hegseth wasn't fired for being that stupid and irresponsible, a little less than a year later, Pete Hegseth was allowed to be the only one in the Situation Room stupid enough, irresponsible enough, arrogant enough to agree with Benjamin Netanyahu as the Israeli prime minister, pushed for and got Trump to agree on attacking Iran. The only voice pushing for this war was that of Pete Hegseth, whose own mother calls him a serial abuser of women, a body slathered in neo-Nazi tattoos. Everyone in mid-February inside the Situation Room where Benjamin Netanyahu made his pitch, everyone in the Trump White House said, don't do it. Do not listen to Netanyahu. Everyone. Marco Rubio, Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J.D. Vance, Radcliffe, the head of the CIA, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, all of them told Trump, don't listen to Netanyahu. Do not bomb Iran. Only one person in the room said, let's do it. And that was the woman and alcohol-abusing, Islamophobic, racist, anti-Catholic, white Christian nationalist covered in neo-Nazi tattoos, Pete Hegseth. He is, by all definitions of the word and term, a war criminal and guilty of violating the Espionage Act. The bombing campaign against Yemen in March of 2025, war crimes. You can't bomb a refugee camp filled with Somalis just because you hate people of color. Every single airstrike on so-called narco-terrorists in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, every one of them is a war crime. And when you raise that issue with Pete Hegseth, who paid a woman, $70,000 to keep quiet about her rape allegations, when you raise this issue with Pete Hegseth, whose own sister-in-law wanted to testify under oath about how he physically abused his second wife during the confirmation hearings, she wanted to tell the Armed Services Committee about how Pete Hegseth physically and emotionally abused his second wife. When you raise this question about the legality of these illegal extrajudicial airstrikes on the high seas, Pete Hegseth cowered. He cowers behind our troops and says, "You're slandering our brave men and women in uniform who are putting their lives on the line carrying out these airstrikes in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific." And yet, when it comes to getting permission from Congress to conduct these airstrikes, Pete Hegseth insists, well, we don't need permission from Congress for these airstrikes on the narco-terrorists. We don't need any authorization from Congress because the War Powers Act only applies to when our troops are in harm's way. And these airstrikes over the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific are being carried out primarily by drones. For the most part, these are drones, and therefore no soldier is in harm's way, so Congress has no right to invoke the War Powers Act. So our troops are not in danger every time we take out a boat and kill the people on board, supposedly narco-terrorists. Our troops are not in danger. But when you accuse Hegseth of committing war crimes, which these are, by every definition of the term war crimes, international and domestic, you're attacking the brave men and women who risk their lives killing these alleged narco-terrorists, even though Pete Hegseth said they aren't risking their lives. These are drones, therefore we don't need permission from Congress under the War Powers Act. The way it works with Hegseth, who is a coward, that's usually what, as somebody who quit drinking years ago, I know that we are cowards. Pete Hegseth is a coward. The way it works with this coward is criticize me, you criticize our troops, you endanger our troops. Criticize my war. Criticize my illegal bombing campaigns in Yemen, or in the Caribbean, or in the Eastern Pacific, or in Iran. You're endangering the lives of our soldiers. He conveniently leaves out that surrendering classified material on an unsecured signal group chat endangered the lives of our pilots flying over Yemen. He leaves out that attacking Iran without providing our troops stationed in Kuwait, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia with adequate protection endangered their lives, leaving 400 wounded and 17 dead, and then, as we've discovered, tries to keep those numbers secret for national security reasons. And what he does rather theatrically while testifying on Tuesday is insist that any criticism of his war dishonors the memory of our soldiers who sacrificed their lives for this mission. He insists that you criticize his motives, his explanations, and justifications for his wars. The mere questioning is traumatizing all the newly christened Gold Star families. Cannot criticize the war. It's unpatriotic, and it damages the morale of our troops, and it forces Gold Star families to ask, what did we sacrifice our loved ones for? How dare you talk that way, Senator? And yet, Pete Hegseth has no problem, as our defense chief, testifying under oath, opening his last press briefing back in May by insisting, unlike every unnecessary war fought since World War II. These are his words. Unlike every war America has continued to lose. He said, we lose war after war. His words. He said, unlike every military mission since World War II that we have lost, this war in Iran is a resounding success because we finally have a commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, who gets it. His words. We have a commander-in-chief who says, finally, you never put troops in harm's way unless you have a clear and definable mission. Clear and definable. He has 10 clear and definable missions. Depends what day of the week it is. So when we say his war is based on a series of lies, that it's unnecessary and is a failure, we're disgracing the memory of all the soldiers who were killed and injured fighting it. But when he says, since World War II, every war has been a failure, we have lost every war, he can go ahead and dishonor all the Vietnam vets, all the Korean War vets, or all the Persian Gulf War vets who got killed. Go ahead. Feel free to say that was a lie, a failure, we lost. Go ahead. You can dishonor every war except my war. This hateful bigot, Pete Hegseth, is by every definition a war criminal and should be brought before the International Criminal Court. And yes, we are not signatories to the International Criminal Court, but we bring war criminals before it because something is either a war crime or it's not. And with 2 million people behind bars, mostly of color or poor, we always insist there are no gray areas when it comes to crime, unless it's a crime committed by a white man like Pete Hegseth, who has committed too many war crimes to count. Pete Hegseth, by every definition, is a war criminal, or at least should be tried as a war criminal. the only way to stop war crimes is to fight war crimes by arresting and putting war criminals on trial. If you say he's not a war criminal, put him on trial. Let him prove his innocence. The War Crimes Act of 1996 was signed by Bill Clinton, and what it did is it codified into law the 1949 Geneva Conventions that forbids all the things we're doing right now in Iran and over the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific and Yemen, fighting these illegal wars. According to the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which became American law in 1996, a member of our military and or government can be prosecuted for torture, unlawful confinement, or deportation of civilians in this country, from this country, or any country we're occupying. A member of our military and or government can be prosecuted for war crimes because of destruction of civilian infrastructure during wartime, killing civilians for the sake of killing civilians who had nothing to do with the disposition of the war. The Fourth Geneva Conventions, which as of 1996 is American law, very specific about the targeting of civilians. The U.S. military, under our law now, is forbidden from killing civilians who are in no way aiding and abetting armed combatants. That's international law, and because of the War Crimes Act of 1996, it's domestic law. You cannot fire on boats because you think they're narco-terrorists. By law, you have to give them an opportunity to surrender, to turn around. And if they're turning around, you can't fire on them, which we've done. And if there are any survivors, you can't give the order, kill them all, which we know somebody in the military gave on the survivors of one of those attacks in the Caribbean. Hegseth said, I didn't give it, but I would have. War crime. It's a war crime. Now, Marco Rubio announced this week plans to dismantle the ICC, the International Criminal Court. He's accusing the ICC of waging war on the United States by enforcing international law. That's what Marco Rubio is saying, that the ICC is interfering with our military by enforcing international law codified into domestic law here in the United States in 1996. So we don't need an ICC, an International Criminal Court, to prosecute domestic war criminals like Pete Hegseth or Marco Rubio or Donald Trump or George W. Bush. And just in the spirit of bipartisanship, I'll throw in Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. They should be put on trial. They should prove to us they're not war criminals. Nobody's entitled to be our commander-in-chief. Nobody's entitled to immunity from our laws, despite what way too many Americans are brainwashed into believing. Airstrikes overseas that kill civilians never keep us safe. Never. It's never in the interest of national security for our president to phone in an airstrike that either targets or accidentally kills civilians. It is never in our national security interest because that creates more enemies, more terrorists, with more reasons to attack our soldiers and our homeland. Democrat or Republican, I don't care. When you are the commander-in-chief of our military, using our men and women, our military muscle and machinery paid for by our tax dollars, you cannot kill civilians. It's a crime. And you need to be held accountable. You need to explain why, for example, it was necessary to bomb a refugee camp in Yemen populated by Somalis. You need to explain yourself. You need to prove it was not malice. Malice, as in you were careless, you were told that these were innocent civilians, but you didn't care. That's malice. You need to be tried, and you need to prove that the killing of civilians was an accident. You have to prove to us it was an honest mistake. Otherwise, you're guilty of war crimes. And for the good of our country, if you're guilty, you must join the 2 million other Americans behind bars right now. That's good for national security. That makes America safer, keeps our troops safer. This is where it gets even more interesting. So the War Crimes Act of 1996 only applies to America. It only allows the American Justice Department to arrest and prosecute Americans who commit war crimes overseas. But what about foreign leaders who commit war crimes overseas against a foreign people? Theoretically, Benjamin Netanyahu. What about him? Well, America likes to uphold the rule of law internationally, but only when it benefits America. In other words, we are, or at least consider ourselves, the world's indispensable policeman. And we consider ourselves the world's prosecutor. But, like all police officers and prosecutors, we use our own discretion and act in our own best interests. We police the world. We prosecute world leaders the same way we police and prosecute the American people. Go after poor people, especially people of color. And never, ever allow the courts to address crimes committed by the police or the prosecutors. It's a one-way street when it comes to the world. We, America, police you. We prosecute you. But you don't get to police or prosecute America. The United States, this is what the Black Lives Matter protests were all about domestically. We treat the world the way we treat each other. And that is why we are not signatories to the International Criminal Court. We signed onto it, the Rome Statute, but then we chickened out and never became official signatories. Because Clinton said, wait a second, I got enough problems with Paula Jones and Monica Lewinsky. I don't need problems with the ICC. And this posed a laughable problem for Joe Biden after Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Now, invading another country is not in violation of the War Crimes Act of 1996 because it's not a violation of the Geneva Conventions of 1948. Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine violated a whole other suite of international laws that makes it illegal to invade a sovereign state. Talking war crimes. The Geneva Conventions of 1948, codified into law here in the United States by the War Crimes Act of 1996, those enforce laws that must be obeyed during war. Whether the war is legal or not has no bearing on this. And during the invasion, it was very apparent that Putin and his soldiers were committing war crimes. Even Laura Loomer now is admitting this, in direct violation of the Geneva Conventions of 1948. They were deporting Ukrainians, especially children, and sending them to Russia, kidnapping. They were ethnically cleansing parts of the Donbass. They were targeting civilian infrastructure, like apartment buildings. These are, according to the Geneva Conventions, war crimes. And so our president at the time, Joe Biden, made me laugh when he said he was working with the International Criminal Court to bring Vladimir Putin to justice. My longtime listeners, I'm not talking about the people listening to this episode, I'm talking about people who have been listening to me for the past 17 years, which I think is about the length of this episode. My longtime listeners remember me laughing at Joe Biden, saying, all of a sudden, the United States is a signatory to the International Criminal Court. All of a sudden, because Joe Biden doesn't like Vladimir Putin, he's cooperating. America's cooperating with the International Criminal Court. Well, it turns out that the United States cooperates with the International Criminal Court when it suits our own interests. We are not signatories, meaning we can't arrest our own war criminals, and you can't arrest our war criminals, like Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio. But we can arrest your war criminals and bring them before the ICC, the International Criminal Court, when it suits our interests. We will use the ICC. In other words, we're not ordering the whole meal. We're going a la carte. I'll have the lobster tail, the soup, and a small salad. That's all I'm in the mood for. That's how we treat the menu offered at the ICC restaurant. For example, in 2011, during Obama's illegal bombing campaign against Libya, our then Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, ordered our ambassador to the United Nations to vote in favor of a resolution before the General Assembly authorizing the International Criminal Court to try Muammar Gaddafi for war crimes. She and Obama lent support to the international community for the trial of Muammar Gaddafi, which never took place. But if she and Obama were committing war crimes by bombing Libya, well, we do not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC. That's how it works when you're America. We, right now, are assisting the International Criminal Court in its prosecution for war crimes committed in Sudan. The U.S. Embassy in Rwanda, see if you can notice the pattern here. The U.S. Embassy in Rwanda transferred a leader from the Democratic Republic of the Congo to The Hague to face prosecution before the International Criminal Court. You see the pattern? Who are we bringing before The Hague? Our own military tracked down African leaders in Uganda and brought them to The Hague to face prosecution before the International Criminal Court, even though the brilliant actor Michael Rapaport points out we're not signatories to. Therefore, my mayor, Zohran Mamdani, according to Michael Rapaport, is stupid, ill-informed when he said our federal government should turn Benjamin Netanyahu over to the ICC, because Michael Rapaport, the genius, said we're not a signatory to the ICC. Doesn't matter. We turn criminals or alleged war criminals over to the ICC all the time. But do you see the pattern here? War criminals from Uganda, war criminals in the Congo, Sudan, Muammar Gaddafi. What do they all have in common? Melanin. Melanin. Like I said, America polices the world the same way we police America. We make certain that black people, people of color, poor people get arrested and tried, even in a court we refuse to recognize, a court that can never touch our police or our prosecutors. Our country, Michael Rapaport, not only cooperates with the ICC, it works with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, even offering bounties that have been carved out for the arrest of war criminals indicted by the International Criminal Court, but only when it suits our needs. Only when it's a person of color from a poor nation, not Benjamin Netanyahu. That's the way it works, Michael Rapaport. Mayor Mamdani, when he called on the federal government to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes, knew what he was talking about. So Michael Rapaport, actor, you should shut your effing mouth. You're stupid. You really are stupid. I talked about this back in 2022 when Joe Biden was ordering his Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, to look into ways to bring Vladimir Putin before the International Criminal Court. I pointed out the hypocrisy and the arrogance. And Joe Biden heard me. He listens to the show. He says, David, you're my touchstone. You're the only one I trust to hold my feet to the fire. No, he didn't say that's not true. Doesn't listen to my show. Because who does, really? Who would listen to this? But I did explain to my audience that we're not signatories to the ICC, and it was laughable that Joe Biden suddenly was calling on the IC, and I mocked him relentlessly. So what happened? Not because of me, but Congress in 2022 passed, and Joe Biden signed into law the Justice for Victims of War Crimes Act of 2022. Now, that's an amazing piece of legislation. It's amazing, and it's backfiring. The Justice for Victims of War Crimes Act of 2022 is American exceptionalism. Everything that's wrong with American exceptionalism, in that now we don't need the ICC. We don't need to become signatories to the ICC. We don't have to cooperate with the ICC because we have now become, at least in our estimation, the International Criminal Court. That is why Marco Rubio is announcing plans to dismantle the International Criminal Court. And thanks to Joe Biden's Justice for Victims of War Crimes Act of 2022, Marco Rubio can claim we don't need the International Criminal Court. We are the International Criminal Court. The Justice for Victims of War Crimes Act of 2022 allows the United States to be the judge, the jury, and executioner around the world. We get to decide who committed a war crime overseas, and we can arrest them and try them. Unless, of course, it's we. In which case, I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. And I'm telling you, you say one bad thing about the mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani. Rhetorically, I will rip your head off. Not going to do it physically, but you're not going to get away with it. I'll ruin a dinner party. I'll ruin a picnic. I will ruin a retreat in the woods. You say one bad thing about Mayor Zohran Mamdani, I will rip your effing head off rhetorically. Okay. Go to my website and davidfeldmanshow.com and read my show prep. It's there, free. You can have it for free. You can read everything that I'm reading, and it's updated every 15 minutes. It's tailored. I wrote this feed through Google that allows me to get a constant stream of news from reliable news sources about things that matter, like J.Lo's sister's birthday, coinciding with Fashion Week in Paris. And, you know, a lot of this stuff is great, like this. These are my show notes. This is what I'm working off of. These are notes that I take down, and then I put them into a PowerPoint presentation, and then I work off them for the show. And it's like a home version of the game. If you want these notes, and you could, bring some friends over and play the game, play the David Feldman Show game. You all hand these notes out, and you compete to see who can be more annoying. You can do your own podcast with this stuff. I'm giving you really important information, and all I ask in return for this is your name and email. I'm surrendering my notes and I asked for your name and email. Okay, I'm done. I'm done. Not good. Not good to do a 3-hour show. Nobody wants me to do a 3-hour show. I'm a very sick man. This is mental illness. This is not good. Not good. But they're not going to win. I am keeping track of them. They're not going to win. I know their crimes. I'm keeping track of them. And if anybody in Australia, New Zealand, or Canada has a place for me to hide, you know, you know where to reach me.